book over the last little bit, talking about what makes Jesus mad, and he was hitting on a couple different themes this week that reminded me of a story that my father-in-law told me about these guys. My father-in-law, when he was a youth minister in the 70s, was challenging his youth group to be careful about music, about rock music, and you know, you got and that's a healthy lesson. I mean, we need to be careful with the music we listen to. If you listen to music, it's constantly telling you that women are bad words, then you start thinking of people different. If you listen to music, it's constantly pushing you to be angry or in a rage, then it affects you. Music affects your emotions. All that's healthy and it's worth thinking about. But in the 70s, especially, there was this movement that said that any music that wasn't Christian music was dangerous, and that if you were a Christian, you really should get rid of all of it because as Christians, we just can't be part of that culture. And it was really prevalent in the 70s and in the 80s there when I first became a Christian. They would even have guys who went around the country who would tell you what some of the music sounded like if you played it backwards. And then if you played it backwards, sometimes those messages could get into your head. The Beatles actually were the first band to be accused of doing that on a song on the White Album called Revolution Number 9. Revolution Number 9 might be the worst song they ever wrote. It's certainly right up there with the worst songs they ever wrote. They were really heavy into drugs by that point, and it shows on Revolution Number 9 that they were using a lot of drugs by that point. And when you listen to the song, it doesn't make a lot of sense going forward. But if you go backwards, there's a message in there apparently about Paul or about somebody being dead, and so people would play their records backwards when records were a thing, and they could say, oh, here, I think I heard a message in that. And it kind of launched a whole deal that you need to get rid of that kind of music. My father-in-law, this is where the story comes in, where he was telling the kids some of that, or maybe they had a guy come in or speak or something, and one of the kids was convicted by it. And so the next day, he brought all of his Beatles albums, and he had Beatles posters and Beatles paraphernalia, different Beatles things, and he brought them all in this big box to my father-in-law and said, I don't have the heart to throw this away. I just can't do it. But I feel guilty about it, and I just wanted to give it to you. And so Ralph also felt guilty about throwing it away. I mean, he didn't want to do that either because, you know, it was a lot of money in that. So he just taped it up, put it in his office, figured the kid would come back in a week or two and want it back. Well, he didn't come back in a week or two, and Ralph kind of forgot about it. And he moved a couple, 3 or 4 different times, and on one of his last moves, he was, and you start collecting stuff. You don't even know what it is. It's in the big pile of boxes in the basement, and this was like that. And so he was going through some stuff, and he finds this box, like 25 years later, of all this Beatles stuff. But suddenly that stuff's worth a lot of money. I mean, just an amazing amount of money. And I think he had a moment of temptation, but not very long. And so he finds, this before Facebook, so he calls the kid, finds the number of this guy and says, hey, I've got all that. Remember that box a long time ago? Oh, yeah, that was crazy. Wish I had that box now. Well, about that. And got it back to him, and he was real thrilled, and I think probably made a small fortune if he sold any of it because it was worth quite a bit of money. But that episode, that whole season of life where we were told that if you listened to certain music, then it was devilish and you were going to be of the devil, and you couldn't do it. And some youth groups even would burn all their albums, bring all their albums in and burn it. I don't know why you couldn't just throw it away, but they burned it, and it conveyed a couple of messages out there, and I think they were accidental messages, but they might have been on purpose. But one of the accidental messages was that in order to be a Christian, you've got to be different than everybody else. Now that in and of itself is not a terrible message, right? I mean, but what Christ was after when he said things like that was, I want you to be holy. I want you to be loving. I want you to have peace in your heart. It wasn't about just being weird for the sake of being weird, right? It wasn't just to be different for the sake of being different. It was different because you were pursuing something different. And so it conveyed that message that you can't really be part of us unless you completely turn your whole life around, which again, initially is a good message, but it can get somewhere where it's different. And we start making exceptions. In the youth group that I was going to, Van Halen was bad, but Willie Nelson was good. And have you seen Willie Nelson, you know? You could listen to country radio and be fine. God loved country music was the thinking of some of my sponsors, but you couldn't listen to more of the secular stuff. And it's just weird walls that we put up, right? But it also has the effect, kind of subtly, that if you don't listen to that kind of music, if that's something that you don't do, and everybody else does, well, then you're a little more righteous, aren't you, than they are. I don't know if that was on purpose. That may not have been a feature of the deal. It may have been a bug, or it may have been a feature of the thing. It may have been the reason we did it. And it's not the only thing that youth groups and ministries have done. There have been lots of different things through the years. When I first became a Christian, I was told that Christians don't drink, and that wasn't a hard message for me to hear, because I had seen some people as a kid who were drunk every holiday, and I didn't have much interest in doing that. That wasn't something. I mean, I saw what it did there, and I had drank a little at different times, but not much, and it was never attractive to me. And so it was very easy for me at that point to say, okay, there you go. I'm not going to do it anymore. And I'll tell you, before I even get into this thing, I think I'm being. I think I can say pretty honestly that most people who drink more than just like a little glass of champagne at New Year's Eve or a little glass of champagne at a wedding, if you drink more than just that, most people who drink more than that have at least one embarrassing story about where they drank too much. And I think I can tell you as a minister here that if you will let that part of your life go, you will avoid stupid more often than people who don't let that part of their life go. If avoiding stupid is one of your agenda items in living. But at the same time, Jesus really did turn water into wine. And it was really wine. And he hung out with people who were drinking enough that he was accused of being a drunkard, even though he never was. And when I make a rule that says in order to be a Christian, you got to be just like me on this thing, it does the same thing as the Beatles deal did. It lets some people know they can't ever really be clean enough to get close to God. And that's not a good message to send. And it also sends this message that maybe I'm a little more righteous than everybody else, which is not a good message for me to have. The weird part about that is when I take that second message deeply to heart, it does much more damage than the drinking ever would. C.S. Lewis talked about how there's two different kinds of sin. There's the animal sins, and that's the stuff that goes to our senses, stuff we taste or smell or touch. You know, it's sleeping around, it's drinking too much, it's smoking, it's all the stuff we do to sate the animal part of us. Then there's the spiritual sins. That's the stuff you can't really see. It doesn't really satiate a sense at all. It's just stuff like envy and greed and pride, right? And Lewis said the spiritual sins are much deadlier than the animal sins. But most churches get much more focused on the animal sins than the spiritual sins. It's a crazy thing that we do. I could be, if we were to rank everybody in here, I could be the proudest person here. I could have more problems with pride and arrogance than any. Somebody has to be first. It could be me. And maybe I'm the one who has the most arrogant heart in the whole church. And I could be that way for years and keep my job here as minister. But if I crack open a beer in the foyer, what's going to happen? Right? And which of those two things is worse? Well, there's no comparison which one's worse. Right? And again, I'm not suggesting we should go crack open a beer in the foyer. That gets away from my point a little bit. And I'm not saying that again, I just told you, I think alcohol can make people stupid. And I've never known anybody who was a casual drinker or serious drinker who didn't agree with me on that. Alcohol can make people stupid. That's not controversial, is it? But when I put up a wall and say that if you disagree with me on this at all, I go further than Jesus. And I should never go further than Jesus. I should never be more legalistic than Jesus. But it's not just that. I can take another issue. When I was a youth minister, the big issue was modesty. Modesty was the big thing. And we pushed the girls to really watch the things that they wore, and the boys, there were a lot of books about every man's battle and really focusing on lust and how to address that. And some of the messages that we sent certainly were good messages. It's a killer. And if you allow that part of your animal side to get control of you, it affects how you look at the opposite sex. It affects how you feel about yourself. It affects everything. It needed to be addressed. But some of the teaching on it led women to believe that it was their fault somehow if men sinned. That it was something that they were doing, that if they would just straighten up their act, men would be good as gold. And I hang out with men, and I'm telling you it ain't true. And the nature of this thing, too, is if it's all somebody else's fault, then it's not really my fault at all. There's nothing I can do. I'm helpless. And that's a bad message for me to and take in my heart. And there were people who came to feel about themselves that maybe they were showing too much skin and that they just were too big a sinner to be in youth group tonight. Maybe next week you can come back and we'll let you sit here with us. And whenever you start getting to that place, you've went much further than Jesus ever intended to go. And churches have been guilty of all those sorts of things. From the Beatles to drinking, to modesty, to all sorts of different things. And so what I wanted to talk about today is kind of why we do that. Because it's a subtle thing, and it never really goes away. It keeps taking different faces. It looks different each generation, but it never goes away. And this way that sometimes we can look at certain sins that people do as, man, if you do that, you're going to hell. You do that, you're in some trouble, my friend. Anybody who does that, that's the worst sort of thing, and you better clean yourself up before you ever intend to get back. Because at any point, the gospel's real clear about this. Anybody at any point can cry out to God, and He will hear them. That door is always open. So I want to talk about that just a little bit today, if I could. And there's a story Jesus tells. He says to some who were confident in their own righteousness. They thought they didn't need any help with it. They were such good people that people could look to them as an example of being good. And again, there's people like that here in the church. The initial impulse is not a bad one. You know, I feel the initial impulse is the guy who could, in old revivals I used to do, how many of you know for sure if you died tonight where you'd go? And if you could raise your hand, I mean, you're on the right track there, and that's some confidence. But it's not just confidence in where you stand with God. It's confidence in your own righteousness. I'm such a good person that I don't need any help with that. And we should never get there. That's a risk. But people do it. And what you want to be careful of when you read stories like this is assume, well, that's what they did then. Bunch of, knuckle draggers way back in the Old Testament. We're smarter than that now. But I don't know that people have evolved that much since then. And it could happen to people now today too. So to those who are confident in their own righteousness, and they look down on everybody else. In other words, the people around them, it was easy for them to judge. You know how that person is. They've been in and out of relationships. So you know how that person is. I think last night they were at the bar again. You know how that person is. Bunch of Beatles fans. Anyway, you can tease at them and mock at them because they're not quite where you're at. So to that crowd, Jesus tells a parable. He says once two guys went to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee and one was a tax collector. And I know that a lot of you who have been in church a long time know what those things mean. But just so we're all on the same page, okay? Bear with me for like a half minute of teaching. A Pharisee was somebody who dedicated themselves to the strictest reading of the law. Whatever the law says, I'm going to go to the nth degree. I want to make sure there's no way anybody could accuse me of doing anything wrong. As an example of what I'm talking about, the Pharisees believed in tithing, which is where you give 10% of your income to Christ or to God. But they didn't just believe in giving 10% of their income to God. Anything you profited on, you have to give 10% back to God. And in Matthew 23, he says you would even go to the garden, and when your harvest is coming in, you'd shave off 10% of your mint that you got, or 10% of the dill seed that you got, 10% of just the plants that you got. And you take that little bit of 10% shaved off and give that to God. You're so legalistic about it, no one could ever accuse you of making a mistake about anything. And that's the Pharisees. And then on the other side, the tax collectors, you need to understand the cultural dynamics of that time. Rome had conquered Israel, and the people in Israel hated the Romans. They hated the occupying army. They wished they would leave. They wished they would go ahead. But Rome was particularly cruel to the Israelites and to all the nations they conquered in that they paid for their occupation. They made the people they were conquering paid for it. So they would charge the people in Israel to pay for their army being there. The army that they didn't want to be there, they had to send taxes in to keep them there. And it's not hard to imagine even today what psychological damage that would do to the deal. And the Romans made different Israelites collect the tax. And then they rewarded him for it financially. It would have been hard to recruit him any other way. So if you made a decision to be a tax collector, then you would collect money for your own people to pay for the occupying army that was conquering everybody, that everybody hated, and you got to keep a slice of it. And so tax collectors had a lot of money in a relatively poor country, had a lot of money, and everybody knew that lot of money came because you'd taken it from us. So you could give it to these monsters who were taking over everything. Tax collectors were despised. I can't think of a great modern equivalent. I've used before kids who sell, people who sell drugs to junior high students outside of the school. And if everybody knew who they were, people who sell crack and meth to children, you know, it's that kind of, I mean, there was just no part of society where that was okay. There was just no part of society where everybody would say, okay, man, yeah, I share you're a sinner, but you know, it's not that big a deal. But everybody thought it was a big deal. Okay, so these two guys go to pray at the temple, the Pharisee who does everything right and the tax collector who everybody hates. The Pharisee stood by himself, stood up, wanted everybody to see him there, and he prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers or evildoers, adulterers, even like this tax collector. Maybe he points at him, you know, God, I think I'm not like this guy. He said, I fast twice a week and I give a tenth of all I get. So his prayer basically is, I thank you for how great I am. And basically, God, you're lucky to have a guy like me on your team. I'm doing some pretty awesome things out there. And it's hard to imagine the way Jesus phrases this thing, anybody actually praying that out loud. It's hard to imagine anybody being proud enough to pray that particular prayer out loud. Probably in your worst moments, you weren't guilty of praying that particular prayer out loud. But it's his whole attitude. That's what Jesus is using this to illustrate. I mean, the guy just thought he had it all together all the time. He could sit through a sermon and it never bothered him because he has it all together all the time. I don't need any help with this thing. I've got it all figured out. Now, the people you should be talking to, person you should be talking to, Jesus, is this other guy over here. That's the guy who needs to hear a sermon. I mean, he's hellbound right now, but I'm doing just fine. That attitude, that can creep into church. And while you might not be able to phrase it just like Jesus does in this thing behind me, that can sneak up on a person, and you got to be careful about it. That does tremendous damage to your soul. But I want to focus on the other guy, and that's where most of Jesus' focus is too. The tax collector stood at a distance. He wouldn't even get to the front of the room. He wouldn't even get up where anybody could see him. And he wouldn't even look up to heaven. And you could miss something there. Culturally, we've changed. People in America, when we pray, normally we bow our heads. In fact, that's what you'll say, bow your head to pray. Jesus, most of the time when he prayed in the New Testament, looked up. Now in the Garden of Gethsemane, it says he bows down with his face to the ground. There were moments of great sorrow where he did it. But the traditional Jewish way in this time was to look up and pray. And if you've never done that, you might want to give it a try sometime. Just look up and pray, and that's what they would do. But this guy doesn't do that. This tax collector doesn't do that. He wouldn't even look up at heaven. And Jesus mentions it because it's unusual. He wouldn't even look up at heaven. He's so embarrassed before God. I mean, you think about all the different people he's compromised, all the different people he's lied to, all the different people he's hurt. I mean, his own parents won't invite him over anymore. Everybody that he knows thinks he's sold out. The only people who hang out with him and like him are people who have done the same stupid things he's done. I don't know if you ever had a moment in your life where you woke up in your 30s or 40s and how did I get here? And you can look at all these different stupid decisions you made and 10 years of my life are gone, or 15 years. Or in fact, sometimes you'll hear somebody say it after a bad relationship. You stole the best years of my life. I can't ever get that back. That's the moment this guy's having. I mean, he looks at his life, he takes inventory. He can't even look up at heaven, beats himself on the chest as he's talking about it. And he says, God, have mercy on me, I'm a sinner. In fact, literally, have mercy on me, the sinner. Have mercy on me, the sinner. I'm the worst. He's just so broken. I mean, and every part of him says he's broken. He stands at a distance. He can't get close to other people. When this guy in front stands up and says, I'm glad I'm not like this guy, and says it out loud, he's not even offended by it. He probably agrees with him. Yeah, you're lucky you're not like me. He's just completely broken. And Jesus says, I'm going to tell you that man, rather than the other went home justified before God. That man, and again, he's still a tax collector. When he leaves that place, he's still a tax collector. He'll go right back to doing the same things he did before. And the Pharisee who gave his money away to the poor, who did so many good things for so many different people, he's not justified. In spite of all the good stuff he does, his heart's really far from God. Because part of drawing close to God at all is realizing that God is the only hope any of us have. We do this sleight of hand, you know. It's the you can fool a little kid, take a quarter and say, hey, see the quarter here? And now where's the quarter? And it's still in your hand over here. But the kid doesn't know that, and they're just amazed. They can't believe the quarter disappeared like that. And it's all sleight of hand. By sticking your other hand out there big like that, you get him to focus on it, and you've got the deal over here. And we do that with our sin. Well, yeah, I still struggle with terrible, awful thoughts, but look at how I'm tithing. Or yeah, I still struggle with anger and prejudice, and I'm not putting my wife and my kids first like I should. But look at how successful I am over in this other area. And God's never fooled by that sort of thing. And we shouldn't be fooled by it either. We just doing magic tricks on ourselves. And so this prayer, God have mercy on me, I need it. That's always the best prayer. That's always the best idea. God has a heart for the small and the least. He says, for all those who exalt themselves, I'm going to humble them. And those who humble themselves will one day be exalted. God says, I'm going to turn it all upside down. And really, the wise person learns pretty quick that he needs not to be too confident about his own righteousness. In Luke chapter 15, this is the same chapter as the prodigal son. It says the tax collectors and the sinners were all gathering around Jesus. They wanted to hear what he had to say, but the Pharisees and teachers of the law, they muttered, this man welcomes sinners. And that word mutter is a word that sounds like what it is. They mutter, 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 mutter. There's a word for that, and I can't know what the word is, but it sounds like what it is. They mutter, 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 mutter. And they don't even call Jesus by his name. This dude, this guy, what's his name? He's welcoming sinners. But the sinners themselves, man, they're thrilled to hang out with Jesus. Jesus is undoubtedly the best human being that any one of them have ever been around, but they're not threatened by him at all. Why are so many sinners threatened by this place and by church people? It's not because of what God did. It's not because of how God talks. It's not because of how God thinks. I had somebody ask me several years ago, what if a gay couple, back when gay marriage, when Obama made that a legal thing, what if a gay couple wants to come to our church? What would you do? I'd show them to a seat. What are we supposed to do? And are they worse sinners than the rest of us? I just don't know that. I think our attitude on this thing can get so crazy sometimes. Jesus was the best person any one of them ever wanted to be, but the sinners loved him. They didn't feel threatened by him. In that same conversation all those years ago, when I said that, somebody kind of objected. They said, well, wait a minute. Don't you think we have an obligation to tell them that they're sinning? That we think that they're on the wrong path? Man, don't you think they know that we think they're on the wrong path? I mean, there's Christians holding signs up at gay funerals. Haven't we been clear that they know where we stand? I think where they're confused is that I think they think we don't love them. Or that if we love them, we only love them because we have to. We love the sinner, but we hate the sin, and he makes us love you, so we do, but we don't really like you that much. But that's not how they did with Jesus. Jesus liked them. He liked hanging out with them, and they liked hanging out with him. I think somewhere we've missed it in terms of how we operate. Jesus was drawn to the Beatles fans. He was drawn to the people who no one else would be drawn to. And he wasn't that offended when people said crazy things. You know, John Lennon saying that the Beatles were more famous than Jesus That offended Christians much more than it offended Jesus. He's never been that worried about his own standing. One last thing on the prayer that Jesus says after that guy says, God have mercy on me, a sinner. I tell you the truth that this man, the guy who prayed that, God have mercy on me, I'm a sinner, he went home justified. Justified, I learned a long time ago as a kid in church that justified is what happens just as if I had never sinned. When I'm justified, it's just as if I had never sinned. He makes you clean. Now think about that for a second, because that's important. And it's important with anybody that you would put in that category of unclean or beneath wherever you think you are. He made him justified, just as if he had never sinned. When you first became a Christian and you came to church the very first time, you struggled with some stuff. And it didn't go away just like that. For some people, that's a big shock. They assume that when they become a Christian, all the old stuff will suddenly be unattractive, and a lot of it wasn't unattractive. Some of you have been Christians for 40 or 50 or 60 years, and some of the stuff that you struggled with as a kid, you still struggle with. In fact, that's a curious thing for all of us. That's not even a Christian thing, that you can be, as a kid, go through some trauma, and it affects you the rest of your life. You would think that eventually you'd just get over it, but you can't. I mean, some trauma, some awful thing happens to you as a kid, or you're conditioned as a kid to believe that you're small or worthless or you're not enough. And those messages, they just never, ever go away. They just stick in your head all the time. And some mistakes that you made when you were younger, they just continue to have their hooks in you and haunt you. And when you first became a Christian, you knew that you didn't have it all together, but that God had justified you because you were coming to Him. It was His righteousness and not yours. And it was just as if you had never sinned, though you knew you had sinned, and you knew you were still sinning. And when you first became a Christian, I don't know what the word is, incongruity, I mean, it didn't bother you because you knew it, right? And somewhere deep down, you know it now. I've talked about this before, and I know I use the same stories over and over again. I'm an old man, so bear with me. But the notion that when you get to heaven, right, the idea that God is going to look at you and say, finally, Elston, you're here, somebody to talk to. Right? The idea that God is going to, that you're the one He's been waiting on all these years who agrees with Him on everything. I mean, you know that's not true. You know that if you die at the same time, some big car wreck in Bedford, and you die at the same time, somebody from First Baptist and Tabernacle of Praise and Donica, a Church of God, and you all die at the same time and you're standing there, you know that God's not going to say, well, only one of you really had it right. You know that's not going to happen, right? I mean, you know that intuitively that that's not going to happen. That God, even in heaven, when you come in, is going to look at you and say, it's not your righteousness that's making me take you in here today. It's my righteousness and my mercy, God says, that I'm extending to you freely. That even there. So why do we do that to other people? Why do we tell people that unless you get this and this and this and this worked out, you can't come? I just think there's a risk in how we approach things. Again, a risk for the other person that we put up a wall so they can't get in, but there's a risk to us too. So that Pharisee was a hypocrite, Jesus says, in a different place. He says in Luke chapter 12, meanwhile, a crowd of many thousands had gathered, and they're trampling on one another, and Jesus talked to his disciples first. He says, be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. Yeast is kind of an evocative metaphor here. Yeast permeates through the whole dough. So this teaching, this hypocrisy has a way of leaking into a whole group, Jesus says. You beware. Be on your guard about that. You know, keep your eyes open. Don't let that get in here and infect us. Their hypocrisy. Because hypocrisy is contagious. When you go on Facebook or on Instagram or wherever you post pictures of yourself, if you can ever get a chance to be with somebody famous, you know, if you could be with somebody famous to get a picture, you want to put that picture on where everybody can see it. I was with the important person. But it doesn't have to just be an important person. Just the people who you think are cool or beautiful or impressive or powerful. You want to put pictures. Here we are all hanging out. We're all dressed up. Look at the food that we're eating. And there's nothing wrong with that in and of itself. So I'm not wanting to make anybody feel guilty about that. Nothing wrong with it. But why do we do that? I mean, what's the agenda? Well, you want people to know that you kind of got your life together. You do. And again, in and of itself it's not wrong. It's not bad. It's not a bad thing. And I hope this doesn't change anybody's Facebook habits. But the reason we do it, right, is we want people to know. Why would you ever take a picture of your food and put that out for everybody to see? What would ever be the agenda for that? Well, I want you to think I'm not just eating McDonald's. Look at this here, huh? And while you were home eating refried chicken nuggets, here I am doing pretty good for myself. And again, nothing wrong with it. If you had a particularly good pork chop or something there and you want everybody to see that, nothing wrong with that in and of itself. But we do it to let everybody know where we're at. I've kind of got things together, right? Well, you can see how just a half a step further and motives start to change. Just a half a step further, you see somebody else post something and you're mad because they had it better than you did. You see somebody else and it seems like their family is doing better than yours is doing because they're all smiling so much more. Or you see, they had 2 pork chops on their plate and you just got the one. And so suddenly just a half a step further than where you were and it's not real. Because none of that's who you are. It's just what you did or what you ate or who you hang out with. It's not you. I mean, aren't all of us hungry just to be with people who love us, for us, that I don't have to impress? I mean, for most people, isn't that the worst evening where you're just constantly doing small talk all night long and you're never letting them see who you are because you don't want them to see? I mean, you're talking about sports and politics and all the different things we talk about, and at the end of the night, you navigated it. You got through it, but no one really knew you, and you didn't really know anybody else, and it's just pretend. It's just an act. This word hypocrisy means play acting, and as far as I can find out, Jesus is the first one to take that word and apply it in a religious context. He says you're just pretending to be right. You're not right. You're acting. You're posing. It's not real, and it's not fooling God. Sooner or later, it's real empty. And especially when we do it for religious things. I mean, I show up at all the right events. I try to comment on the things that people are most interested in, and yet in my own heart of hearts, I wonder how much of this is even real. And I'm scared to ask anybody about it for fear that they'll see me as a fraud. Bob Goff had this line, and I thought it was really cool to quote in one of his books. We're told when we first become a Christian, we're told by someone what God wants us to do or not do. We're told that we shouldn't drink or cuss or watch certain movies. We're told that we want to have a quiet time in the morning and talk to strangers about their walk with God. We're told we should want to go on mission trips. We should want to witness to people. And sometimes we even do it, but we don't know what it means, and usually just for a little while. After long enough, what looks like faith isn't really faith at all. It's just compliance. You start figuring out what you have to do to be seen as righteous here. And what do you have to do to be seen as righteous here at Mount Pleasant? You need to attend this meeting in this room at least 2 times a month, probably. That'd be enough. That'd be enough. You need to sing the songs, but you don't have to sing them very loud. Just stand when we all stand and kind of mumble through the words. You don't have to mean it. When they say pray, just kind of nod respectfully. You don't have to really pray. Just kind of be nice. And it's just compliance. It's not really faith. You're not really trusting Him for anything. He says the problem with compliance is still Bob Goff. The problem with compliance is it turns us into actors. And rather than making decisions ourselves, we read the lines off the script that someone we were told to respect handed to us. And we sacrifice our ability to decide for ourselves. When you first became a Christian, you didn't totally know what was up and down. You just kept coming. You kept listening. You kept opening your heart. You kept asking God to move. Prayers like the tax collector's prayer, God, just have mercy on me, I'm a mess, were probably a lot more common because you knew you didn't have it together. You knew you were just doing the best you could. And as you kept coming at him, well, sometimes he pointed some things out. God did. And it wasn't somebody making you do it, and you weren't doing it to impress anybody. It was just, maybe you'd look at this again. Or you'd hear something in a Bible story, or you'd hear something in a lesson, or you'd be praying about something, and you'd feel some conviction, and he was moving you. And you didn't settle for this compliance, just doing enough that everybody get off your back. You really were hungry to know who he was. It was personal, and it was real. Again, everything I said before about all that stuff, the music we listened to and the drinking and the modesty and any of it, it's still good to be good. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. It's good to be good. It's bad to be bad. You should be good if you can choose to do it. Good is the way to go. But when I make rules about that and I say, unless you're just like me on all this stuff, and if I get so scared of being where the bad people are that I avoid the bad people or make the bad people feel like they're never going to get to my level, it's kind of like the COVID stuff, right? I mean, if I get so scared of what could happen that I don't love people, haven't I taken it too far? If I get so scared that they might contaminate me just by being around them, that I don't love them, isn't that too far? I'm wrestling with that. Because I think when you start pushing people away like that, it does bad things to them, and it does some bad things to you. It makes you proud. It turns you into a hypocrite. The patron saint of hypocrites, if there is a patron saint for hypocrites, I would think would be Jonah in the Old Testament. You're familiar with the story of Jonah, probably, at least the fantastic parts of it. Jonah was told by God, I want you to go to the Ninevites and tell them that they need to repent. And Jonah didn't want to tell the Ninevites to repent because he hated the Ninevites. So when God told Jonah to go east, he went west. He went as far away as he could go. And you're, again, familiar with the wild parts of that story. God sent a storm after Jonah and then sent a fish after Jonah to swallow him and bring him back to the east. And when the fish puked Jonah up there on the land, Jonah said, what do you want me to do? And God said, I want you to go tell the Ninevites to repent. So Jonah did it. He didn't want to do it, but he did it anyway. And he preaches for 3 days. Tells all the sinners in Nineveh that they're sinners and that God's about had it and they better change or God's going to get them. And I got a picture, I think, of some Ninevites looking down, watching Jonah as he was preaching. And he's preaching and he's trying to get them to come around. And they do repent. The Ninevites do come around. They believe it. They say, oh, we had no idea we were doing the wrong thing. We want to get this thing straightened out. And it makes Jonah mad because God says, well, if they're going to repent, I'll take them back. And it's just like that tax collector. He could be the worst mess in the world, but if he says, God, have mercy on me, God's going to have mercy on him because that's what God does. That's what we should do. But it made Jonah mad. No, God, he says, they deserve to die. They deserve to be smacked. If anybody ever deserved to be smacked, it's them that deserve to be smacked. And so he goes outside the city. He finds a place up on a hill, and he's watching, hoping that God will change his mind and, I don't know, rain fire down or something. He's hoping that God will do something awful to Nineveh. And the next morning, after he's sitting out there, God sends him a vine. He makes a vine grow up right beside where Jonah is sitting, and it has big leaves on it, and it shades him from the sun. And if you're ever in a desert kind of area where the sun's just beating you up, it feels shade is amazing. And just a little bit of shade can change everything. You can put up with the heat all day long, and he's so thankful for the shade. And then God sends a worm, and the worm eats the plant, or eats a big chunk of the plant, and the plant dies, and now he's back in the sun again. He's so mad. And God says to Jonah, this is the part that doesn't get preached on as much, but God says to Jonah, are you mad about the vine? It's like they're roommates talking. Are you mad about the vine? And Jonah says, yes, I'm mad enough to die about that vine. And God says, that vine just sprung up yesterday and it's dead today, but you don't care about all these people. He's sitting there above the city watching, hoping that God will smack him. You don't care about any of these people. He says they can't tell their right hand from their left. You know, as Christians, I see Christians who get so wrapped up about their little hobbies or their little concerns or their little political issues, and Christians getting so concerned about their little controversies, about the songs we sing or the what the building looks like and how we're going to handle this political thing or that political thing in church, who's going to be the leader of this and the leader of that. And while we're concerned about our little controversies, the whole world is going to hell. And how can you be concerned about this trivial stuff when people's souls are on the line? And they can't even tell their right hand from their left. And Jonah at the story of Jonah ends, we don't know if he changes. And I guess I'm not going to know today if any of it hits any of you guys or not. I won't know, because we've all learned, haven't we, how to keep ourselves distant. But I want to challenge you not to do that today. I want to challenge you today that if any part of this is working on your heart, that I need to have a bigger heart for the things God has a heart for. I need to have a passion for the things that God has a passion about. If any part of this is kind of smacking you today, man, take action. Do something about it. If any part of this is starting to kind of work on your heart or your mind, man, recognize a couple things, and the band can come back up. Recognize a couple things. Recognize, first of all, that every one of us is sinners. Every one of us is just a mess. Every one of us is just a mistake or two away from losing everything. Every one of us does that. The person beside you who seems like they have everything together might struggle terribly with unforgiveness or lust or anger or pride. I mean, the person sitting beside you who seems like they got everything going on straight, you don't know what kind of things we're all, because you're carrying things. And so when we come to this place ought to be the place where we finally feel free to let that stuff down and ask God, have mercy on me. I'm the sinner. I'm the worst. We should never look at other people as if they're nothing or they're beneath us. Every person you lock eyes with this afternoon, at whatever restaurant you go to or whatever road you drive down, every person you go past, man, they all have a destiny. And one day they're all going to have to stand in front of God in heaven. And it's worth more. That person is worth more than everything you own. And we should see it the same way that God does. We're drawn to the beautiful and the impressive and the rich and the people who are going to make us look better. But we've been called by God to reach to the least of these, to reach to the people who know they're a mess and need a hand up. So as we finish our sermon here today, I'm going to give you a couple of chances if you need to pray to do that. I just pray you take advantage. I pray for just one song here that you not worry at all what anybody beside you is thinking about you. That you don't worry about how they judge you, and if part of this, if you want to sing a little louder or not sing at all, if you want to sit down and pray during this whole thing and not get up and not sing, I just need to focus on my walk with God. Man, that might be the most righteous thing in the world to do. If you want to come up and pray, there will be people on the sides who will pray with you. If you talk to them in the back, say, can you help me? I need somebody to pray. They'll direct you to somebody to pray to, and we'll do that for you. Again, these cards, at the very least, take advantage of that to let us know if there's anything we can lift you up about. But don't leave this place carrying all this stuff. It's just too heavy. Make a decision to give it to God today. Won't you stand up with us? This last song was kind of brought to me this morning. I hadn't thought about it for a long time, but it's